All right, well then, it is 10 o'clock and here we are ready to go. So let's go ahead and jump into our last day of Girls' Day at the Statehouse. So some housekeeping for you first. I know not everybody has necessarily been to the first couple, and so we just want to let you know go ahead and use the chat. It's down there in the bottom of the screen. You can also use the reactions, so you can do a thumbs up, you can clap. I am doing them. You may see that. Also, on the top right of your screen, you can click how you are seeing the session. So you can either see people all gridded out in tiles across, or you can select the speaker view, and that way whoever is talking is going to be the primary person that you'll see on your screen. That is how we do the video recording, so that in the videos it makes a little more sense that you can see the person talking. Let's see, other housekeeping. I am Desti Homan-Sprague. I'm the Executive Director of the Maine Women's Lobby Education Fund, and also want to introduce Logan.
Hello, everybody. For those who don't know me, my name is Logan, and I am the community organizer at the Maine Women's Lobby Education Fund. Just like a lot of our other sessions, I will be monitoring all of your questions in the chat and bringing them up to presenters. So please feel free to put all your questions in the chat, and I'll snag them as they zoom by. So yeah, I'm really excited about this session.
Awesome. And Logan is the person to go to. Today I'm sort of managing the conversation, and Logan is the person to go to if you have any tech problems. So you should be able to click right on his screen, the Maine Women's Lobby screen, and you can chat directly to him if you have any needs. He can take care of that. And I think other than that we are ready to jump in, and just like the last couple, we want to go ahead and start with a quick icebreaker. So if you go over and pick up that link in the chat box. It's a live link, so you have to copy and paste the pollev.com/Maine Women's Lobby. I'm going to paste it in here a couple of times. So go grab that, open up a link in your browser, head over there and answer a question with 1 or 2 words. What do you think of when you think of the Statehouse, or legislation, or legislators? Like, what comes right to mind for you when you think of that? You can put in, like, if you have 2 or 3 answers, you can do that. You just want to space down or enter down after each answer. And then after you go over and do that, Logan's going to share his screen.
Yeah, and I can start doing that right now, because it is already starting to populate. Let's just see. Screen.
And our legislative panel, you are allowed to answer this question too. Do not feel like you can't. We want to know how you feel about it.
This is so cool watching it populate live. Is my grid in the way here?
It looks great from my end.
Okay, great. Wonderful.
I love that people and thinking is right at the top. Nice. Excellent. All right, we'll give that just a few more minutes. Put in your response. All right. Nice. All right. I love that. Thank you all so much. I'm so glad that you could get us started with that. And what are some really good ones here? Changes, leaders, power, communities, dynamic. So good. All right, we go ahead and capture a picture of this, and we'll send it out. We'll put it with the rest of the resources on our Girls' Day website.
Yeah.
Feel free to go have a look at that. And now let's get started with our panel, because I am so thrilled to have real live actual legislators here for us to ask some questions of. So let's start with a round of introductions. And I'll go ahead and call on our legislative panel, because it can kind of be hard until we get going to know how you want to actually, how to get started. So let's see, I see Senator Bellows first on my screen. So Senator Bellows, if you want to introduce yourself and you can share your role, how long you've been a legislator, and your district.
Good morning. I'm so excited to be part of this panel today. So thank you to Maine Women's Lobby, and thank you to the girls that signed in. I am state senator for Southern Kennebec County. I represent 11 towns in Kennebec County. I am in my second term. Terms for senators are 2 years each. So I'm actually in my fourth year of being a senator. Before I became a senator, I ran for US Senate in 2014 against Susan Collins and lost that race. So I think it's always really important never to give up on your dreams, even if you fail the first time. I grew up in the town of Hancock, Maine, even though I live in Manchester now. And actually, I grew up without electricity or running water until I was in the 5th grade. I went to Ellsworth High School. And that's my other favorite thing, is just in the Maine legislature, people come from every walk of life. You don't have to be rich. You don't have to be anything particular. You just have to have a passion and a commitment to working hard.
Nice, thank you so much. Senator Breen.
Good morning, Dusty and everybody. Good morning, Senator Bellows, one of my colleagues from my caucus who I don't get to see enough, and to other legislators. And good morning to everybody who's participating. Thank you so much. This is absolutely the highlight of my week, to be able to say hello and talk about the work that I do and I love. So I represent 6.5 communities in Cumberland County, between Portland and Freeport and Little Sebago Lake and Casco Bay. I have a couple of island communities. And I'm in my 3rd term in the Senate. I'm the Senate chair of the Appropriations and Financial Affairs Committee. And before I was in the state Senate, I served on my town council in Falmouth for 6 years. I was chair for a couple of terms there. And I also served in local government when I lived in Illinois. I love my work, and I feel very fortunate. And personal vignette about my first election to the state Senate was that I won by 10 votes. 10 votes made the difference. So don't ever think that your vote doesn't count. Every single vote really, really counts. Thank you.
Wonderful, 10. Ooh, that was a scraper. Representative Fay, you are next on my screen. Welcome.
Oh, good morning. It's nice to see everyone. During these times, it's really a privilege to be able to get together and have a conversation and share a little bit about the work that we do at the Statehouse. So I'm pretty excited, and like Senator Breen, I've been looking forward to this, I think, for at least a week, maybe a little bit longer than that. So I'm Representative Jessica Fay, and I represent parts of 3 towns in Cumberland and Androscoggin County. So I represent part of the towns of Poland, Raymond, and Casco. And kind of one of the interesting fun things about my district is it's also parts of 3 different school districts, 2 congressional districts, 2 Senate districts, and 3 towns. So it's a lot to sort of wrangle. And this is the first time that I've ever held elective office. I was elected in 2016 for the first time. It was the first time I'd ever run for anything other than sophomore class treasurer in 1984. So I've found that this is a really wonderful job with a lot of opportunity to learn and share. And I'm looking forward to learning a lot here today as well.
Wonderful, thank you. And we have Representative Heppler. Oh, Representative Heppler, we can't hear you just yet. Still no. Oh.
Oh, there it is.
So sometimes in order to make the a different speaker work, you have to go into the settings on the Zoom app itself. There's a little gear that you can click and it will let you use a different speaker. If not, if you might be able to try unplugging those headphones and it might default to your computer's speaker.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and, did I hear you? Do you want to do one more try, another try, Representative Heppler?
How about now?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Great. Super. Okay. Hi.
Oh, I love this technology. So, anyway, I'm delighted to be here. I was part of Girls' Day last year and got to sit with a lot of participants in the House chamber to debate a bill, which was wonderful. I see Addie here, who's from the Bath area, which is my neighborhood. So I'm Alison Heppler, and I represent what I call the towns of the Lower Kennebec. It includes Woolwich, which is where I live, but also Arousix, Georgetown, Phippsburg, Dresden, and a little piece of Richmond. And I serve on the Marine Resources Committee since the area that I come from has a lot of fishermen and lobstermen. And I'm also on the Woolwich Select Board. I will share my first election to the state legislature. I'm in my first term. I ran in a primary in 2016 and I lost by 20 votes. So yes, every vote counts.
Nice. All right, well, let's just start with a little bit of basics. We have on the Girls' Day resource collection, sort of a how a bill becomes a law, a little overview that I know that some people watched before we came into today. So let's talk just a little bit and hear from you all about what you think the role of a legislator is. Like, what is your job and responsibility as a legislator? Maybe I see a big smile from Senator Bellows.
That's just such a great question. And so when I knew I wanted to run for office, I thought the main role of a legislator was passing laws to make positive change. I am really passionate about the environment and civil rights and human rights. And I thought that was all that we did. And it is a huge piece of what we do. But there's another piece of it as well that has become even more important since the pandemic, and that is helping people. So not just helping people by passing laws, but we do what's called constituent services. So for example, I chair the Labor and Housing Committee. We oversee the unemployment system, which right now is a real mess. So people contact us and, you know, every day I have constituents calling me to say, you know, can you help me figure out the unemployment system? And so I do that right now almost every day. Every day we call seniors in our district. I have a team of volunteers and we've been calling everyone who's 70 or over in my Senate district every week and asking them if they need anything. So yesterday I delivered groceries. I mailed out some homemade masks that some volunteers had made. So that constituent services piece is it's something I didn't realize was so important, but it feels really good when you can help people. And so that's a piece of being a legislator.
Wonderful. Does anybody else have something that they'd like to add to that about the sort of roles and duties of being a legislator? Oh, Representative Heppler, we hear we see you, but we don't hear you again. Nope. For some reason, you're back and forth between muted and not muted. And it's not letting me. There, give that a try. No. All right. Well, while we while we while we work on technology, Representative Fay or Senator Breen, if you have anything to add to the roles of a legislator.
Hi there. I was having a little trouble with my mute, so I'm happy to be back. I think that like Senator Bellows, you know, the very specific thing we do is introduce laws, work on laws, pass laws. We actually pass very few compared to how many get introduced every session. And one of the laws that I work on in my committee, I work on one law for the entire session, which is the budget. And that's a bill, just like any other bill. But we work on that in my committee from January to June every 2 years. The other thing that Senator Bellows mentioned is working with constituents, especially in hard times like this. And I do that, and I'm sure Senator Bellows and Representative Fay, Representative Heppler do as well. We work a lot with other levels of government. So for instance, town managers, town councilors, boards of selectmen, and try to bridge the distance between local government and what's happening on the ground in our communities, whether it's in schools or in emergency services, healthcare settings, nursing homes in our communities. And we work to connect them with what's going on at the state level, especially in a time like this when there's sort of ever-changing dynamics, and keeping good information going back and forth between the governor's office and the community, but also connecting folks in the community with the resources that the state has to offer, whether that's connecting with the Centers for Disease Control for help. I have a bunch of nursing homes in my district, you know, connecting them with the resources they need to manage the pandemic. And making sure, checking in, as Senator Bellows said, there's a lot of checking in we do every day with individuals, with businesses, and with other groups of government officials.
Wonderful. So you mentioned that you work on one primary law, Senator Breen, and we do think about laws as being at the heart of what legislators get up to. One of the questions that was submitted early on is, how do you decide what to make a law about? Because as a legislator, you have an opportunity to submit an idea, a bill for a law. And so how do you make a decision about that? Well, yeah, go ahead.
I think that really depends on each individual legislator. Like regular people, we're all regular people, and sometimes we feel really passionate about something, an issue that, you know, we go into the Statehouse with a mission to work on a particular thing, and we might introduce a bunch of bills with that in mind. Other times we have stuff that arises from our district and our constituents where there's a problem going on in our community, and the only way to solve it is through legislation. Other times we'll be contacted by a group of advocates. You know, it might be environmentalists, it might be folks advocating for mental health services, it might be school systems, you know, any number of things. And it really depends on each legislator, how many bills they want to put in. There's no limit. There's a process, but there's, at the beginning of every 2-year session, any legislator can put in any number of bills. So it really depends on each one of us and sort of what our district needs, what our personal passions are, what committees we sit on, and then what kind of capacity we have to do. You know, some legislators will do 30 bills, some will do 2, you know, so it's really up to each legislator to figure out what his or her capacity and passion and, you know, personal priorities are.
Great. Thank you. Representative Heppler, do we want to try your sound now?
How was that?
We
Can
can
you hear?
hear you. It's not great.
Let me, hold on. I'm sorry.
That's quite all right. I also see in the chat box, someone has said there might be a button on her headphones, and when she presses it, it should unmute. So there's a
Is that,
that's great.
okay, sorry.
No worries.
Yeah. So when I ran for office, I didn't really have like a burning issue that I needed to put through for a bill. Instead, I get my best ideas from constituents. From one of the bills I put in this year was to allow veterans who are 100% disabled to get access to a lobster license, recreational lobster license for free. And it was something I had not necessarily thought about, but once he mentioned it to me, he's like, that's a great idea. So that's kind of where I've been in terms of submitting bills. I submitted 3. I can't imagine submitting 30. That's a lot of time and attention.
I have observed over the years too, I've done, legislative advocacy for 12 or 15 years or so, that legislators often take a different perspective on how much time they choose to spend on their bills. I think some float an idea out and hope it works out, and others, tend to it like a precious baby, and everything in between. So.
Yeah, technically speaking, when a legislator introduces a bill to a committee of jurisdiction, that bill is now in the possession of that committee.
Right.
And the committee is going to do whatever the committee feels it should do with it. And there's a wide variety, as Dusty said, about feelings of ownership. Whether I tend to say, okay, committee, now it's in your hands. You're the experts, but that's not the case. A lot of folks feel like, oh, no, this is my bill, my baby. And they want to be very, very involved in every single step of it. So there's a wide variety there. You're right, Dusty.
Yeah.
And I just want to touch on what motivates us to bring bills, because there was a question in the chat that was just like, yes, I have experienced this. And it was, has anyone ever told you you can't do something because of your gender? Short answer, yes. Or have you been treated differently? And my very first job out of college, a year went by and it was time to get a raise. And the men I was working with for the same work, for the same job, got a higher raise than any of the women in my company. And so Senator Breen was also really passionate. She also observed women getting discriminated against and not getting equal pay for equal work. And so she brought forward that bill. It came to my committee, but it was really great to work in partnership. But for Senator Breen, I mean, her leadership helped get that across the finish line. And this year we signed that into law under Governor Mills. So hopefully, if you're working in Maine, moving forward, you're going to get equal pay for equal work. That's a big deal.
Nice. Excellent work.
Yeah, that was pretty awesome, actually. It was really great to be able to vote on that bill. And thanks to Senator Bellows for bringing that up. I was thinking a little bit about what Senator Breen said in terms of having a bill be your baby. And I think part of that depends a little bit on the bill and how important it is to you, but also on the committee. So I found that there have been times where I've had a bill that I wanted to carry, and that sometimes the committee will take it, and you have to understand or realize the way that the committees are operating, and let them do as much as they can. And if it's even possible, you can sometimes try to guide them where you want them to go. But so it's not always either or. I think sometimes it's a little bit of both, hand-holding and being willing to let it go too. and being willing to compromise so that you can get at least part of what it is that you're looking for.
Mm.
And with that bill, I really, I'm not a labor law expert by any means. So, and honestly, to give credit where credit is due, this is a bill that my legislative aide had found in a different state and brought it to me and said, hey, I know you care a lot about this issue, and this bill is being passed in other states. Let's give it a go. And it had gotten vetoed under the prior administration, but then it got some legs under Senator Bellows' committee leadership. And I was not an expert on labor law at all. And so I was happy to see the committee really take ownership of it and help it be the best bill it could be and get it over the finish line. So that I felt very fortunate that the bill landed in the right committee with the right expertise.
Mm. And it really speaks to the role of both bringing in lots of experts and voices to get the best possible product, and then also the role of committees. And I just have to put in a plug here for a great session that's on our pre-recorded resource list, and it's Senator Bellows and Representative Warren talking about the roles of committees and committee chairs. So if you haven't gone and seen that, you should do it. Let's head over to the chat and take some of those questions from you all. I know you're in the swing of things, audience, and you've been submitting those questions, and Logan's been writing them down. So Logan, I'm going to turn to you and give us our first question straight from the audience.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a question that we've probably had in almost every session, and it's one that, oh my gosh, my cat is walking on the piano. I'm so sorry. His cat tower is near the piano. Okay. But it is, how do you keep going when things are not very easy? And I think that we've talked, and this sort of has both what keeps you motivated to do your work and and show up every day, and also how do you take care of yourself when you really need to relax and rejuvenate?
What a great question these days, for sure. So I represent a district that's pretty divided. It's not all one party or another. And so it can be really, really difficult because I get 180-degree opposite opinions from people, and to try to figure out how to balance those. Sometimes you really do feel like you're caught in the middle. And I thought I saw a question in the chat too that asked, how do you deal with people who are mean? And so this kind of goes to that. So I don't feed the trolls, first of all. When people are mean to me, I treat them with the dignity and respect that I would want to be treated with. So back to the first question is, you have to do a lot of deep breathing and try to understand where people are coming from, because I want to give most people the benefit of the doubt that they're hurt or angry or scared or sad. And while I might not agree with where they're coming from, trying to figure out where they're coming from is really helpful to me to try to understand them and why they feel the way they do. So, and then I go out in the garden and pick flowers.
Nice.
I think, can you hear me?
Yeah, Representative Heppler, is that you?
So yeah, I think listening is the biggest lesson I have learned from doing this job, is that you have, even if people are coming at you, being mean, you listen to them and try to, like Representative Fay said, is to reach them where they are, and I have found that that's worked really well. They may or may not vote for me in the next election, but at least I feel like, I represent everybody, not just the people who voted for me. So.
Right. Senator Bellows or Senator?
Circling back to the balance aspect of things, I think that picking what it is that you love doing and trying your best to do what you love makes everything else a little bit easier, or finding things that you find meaningful. because it's hard to be in politics. People are mean. Like Representative Fay, I'm in a very divided district. My district voted for Trump and for me at the same time, and I'm a Democrat. I think that says something good about people's open-mindedness. It also means that, you know, it can be pretty intense sometimes. But because I really love making a difference, like that sounds so corny, but you know, there's another question in the chat about your greatest accomplishment. And for me, it's something that happened before the legislature. I was very involved in Maine's campaign for marriage equality from 2005 to 2012. I spent 7 years of my career where that was one of the biggest, most important things that I was working on. And part of why I wanted to run for office is I wanted to, instead of telling people how they should vote, I wanted to vote. I wanted to, you know, and instead of trying to get people to bring in important pieces of legislation, I wanted to have that opportunity to bring forward bills and laws. So the balance can be really hard, especially for women with ambitions. And, you know, I ran for higher office before. I'll probably run for higher office again. It can be really hard to remember to take time for like yoga and running are my two favorites, or hiking in the woods. But if you're doing what you love, it's a little easier to stay reasonably okay, no matter how bad things get.
And I would just say, I'd echo everything that, you know, self-care and taking care of your own, you know, physical and emotional health in every walk of life is really important. And you do have to have thick skin for this kind of work. And I always joke that, you know, my best training was being the youngest of 6 kids. And I grew up with 4 older brothers who, you know, I learned a lot from. And so one of the biggest things I use is humor. I always have to keep my sense of humor. As Representative Heppler said, it's really important always to be a good listener. And so that even when folks know that you may disagree, they at least feel like you respect their opinion. And you might disagree on one issue, but there could be 7 other issues that you do agree on. And, you know, no matter what, you always want to hear from the people you represent. Every opinion is really important and deserves respect. I think it's sometimes hard for people to reach out and understand really how accessible Maine government is and how accessible their state legislators are. So I try really hard to keep it very friendly, very respectful, and make sure that folks understand that even if we disagree on one thing, I still always want to hear from them. And I think, you know, there are late nights and tense times, and, you know, good old chocolate and tortilla chips, or, you know, whatever your stress eating snacks are, you know, make sure you have them on hand, because you're going to need them for a little while, and then you go home and rest.
Yes. Representative Fay, did you have, I don't recall if you chimed in on this one or not yet.
I did, yeah.
Okay.
And I just want to echo what everyone said again. You know, it's the respect and the listening. And if you respect people, I think for the most part, and they understand that you're treating them with respect, then they will in turn treat you with respect, at least most people.
Yeah. And I've always found that that is true in the whole environment, like doing legislative advocacy or lobbying. I have all sorts of people who adamantly disagree with my positions. I hope people would describe me as someone who they could talk to, that I would listen. And, you know, so it's true for legislators and also their staff and also lobbyists. Like, when you are someone who listens and talks with respect, then more work gets done.
Yeah, and always keep the door open.
Yeah.
I feel like part of the job is to kind of make sure that people know you're accessible. And that's something that that I think is that we could really do in Maine. I don't know whether we could do that in other states, but
Mm.
we could do that. So people will call and say, "Oh, can I talk to you?" And it's like, "Yes, that's my job."
Yes.
You know, I would say too, just to kind of add on to that really quickly, or maybe not so quickly, is I think women actually approach legislating a little bit different sometimes. I think in my experience, my relationships with female legislators across all the entire ideological spectrum, sometimes it's easier for us to work together. And I don't know if that's a gender difference or if it's a difference in the way that we think about the job, but it's something that's always been notable to me.
Mm. Does anybody else want to pick up on that thread of how women may legislate differently, or how that changes your role?
You know, one of the issues that came up, and I teach women's history at UMaine Farmington, and one of the issues that came up dealt with whether women think differently. And we used an example of a Supreme Court case about reproductive rights. And one of the things we were able to point out and to notice is that the women justices, because they had different experiences in doctors' offices and in issues of reproductive health, that they actually brought a different perspective because they had actually been there and participated in some of these things in a way that men had not. And so I think that's a good example of how they bring a different perspective, even if they're not mothers or even if they don't have mothering capabilities like myself. It's there's a different set of experiences.
I think it goes to representation, right? And for so long, women haven't been represented in government, and we're changing that, which is really important. And we're showing women in leadership, but there are barriers. There's a joke in politics that, men just wake up one day and they're like, I should be the president. And right. And we're like, am I qualified enough? Do I have the right resume? Have I gone to the right school? Have I done X, Y, and Z? But here's the secret. Yes, if you are passionate and you have the commitment to do it, you are qualified enough. You are worthy, despite any self-doubts that you might have about it. And I think that we also need to lift up representation of other underrepresented groups. There are only 2 African-American legislators in the whole legislature, and that's 151 members of the House and 35 people in the Senate. I think that's a problem. Similarly, out LGBTQ legislators, we have no transgender legislators. We do have, it's really great to have actually both candidates for Speaker of the House next year are gay, which is great. But we still need more representation. And the fact that they would be the first, and it's 2020, we got to do a better job.
Yeah.
I totally agree. And we also, in our Senate Democratic caucus, we work really, really hard to back each other up. And we have a morning caucus meeting every morning when we're in session. And all of us who have grown up in the years we've grown up in, unfortunately, we tend to apologize a lot when we start to speak. So if we have something to say, we'll raise our hand and say, I'm sorry, but blah, 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 blah. And we now have this no apologies. No women are apologizing for anything. We're here. We're here to do our work. Our voices are to be heard. And we catch each other diminishing ourselves and say, no, you rock, you're here, and we're all here listening to every word you have to say. So we all find little ways, I think, to back each other up, which in those harder times can really, really matter.
Nice. Let's take another question from the chat box. Logan, what do you have next for us?
Yeah, so I really appreciate the discussion around diversity of our representation. And another diversity that all legislators have to deal with is diversities of opinion. So we've gotten a couple variations on this question, and it's basically, have you ever worked on a bill or advocated for a bill that maybe you personally didn't agree with or think was the highest priority, but it was something that your community was really asking for? And how do you find that balance? Because on the one hand, your community wants what they want, but then on the other hand, they also elected you so that you could be that voice. So a lot of folks are wondering about that balance.
All right, who wants
I can say I did it once as a freshman legislator, and I will never do it again.
Oh.
Yeah, it was for one of the communities that I represent wanted to do a project that required some exception to some environmental laws. And I did it because I represented that community and I felt like it was my job to carry the ball. And it was excruciating. And I decided, the bill got voted down in committee almost unanimously. So it kind of died the natural death it was going to die, but it was very, very uncomfortable. And I realized that was a freshman mistake. You live and learn, but I won't be doing that again.
I haven't sponsored a bill I didn't agree with, but I voted in a way that I didn't agree with. And this is and it was a hard lesson, and I haven't done it again in that way. And one of the challenges was, when you're in a district like Representative Fay and I, or Senator Breen's district when she'd first won by 10 votes, or actually Representative Heppler, who defeated an incumbent Republican. Those are hard districts. And so, you get pressure from your colleagues because whichever party has the majority elects leadership and elects the chairs of committees. So there's a lot, you have to, it's not just about the individual legislator, it's about the team. And so there's a lot of pressure for those of us who are in conservative districts sometimes to set aside our most liberal values. And my leadership was like, this bill isn't going to pass anyway. You just need to vote no. It's dangerous for you. They're going to attack you on it. And so I went along and I voted no on a bill that I thought was actually a good idea. And one of my constituents said, "Why did you vote no?" She's like, "I thought I knew you." And I was like, I did it for the wrong reasons. I did it for politics. And she was so disappointed in me, but that was not as hard as being disappointed in myself. So like Senator Breen, it was in my first term. I think it's what I learned in my reelection effort was they said I voted, my opponents said all sorts of lies about how I voted. Of course they, went after me for being too liberal for my district. And, they said things that were far worse than any particular vote. So that made me realize that, it's easier to defend something that you actually believe in. And if it means that you lose your reelection, well, hopefully it won't mean that. But thinking about why we got into this in the first place. And power is really important in politics. I think about positive power and representation, but it's not all about the individual. It's about who you're representing.
And I would jump in and just say that all of those things are true. And then there are the bills that there isn't necessarily a right or wrong. And so you really are able to see both sides of the issue. This is something that's always, for me personally, kind of a thing that keeps me up at night, which is, you do your pros and cons lists and you listen to all of the arguments, and there are those bills where you can actually see both sides, and those are for me, those are the hardest ones. And sometimes politics do come into play when you're thinking about those particular votes. It's true. It happens. And not everything is black and white, and not everything is right and wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is Alison. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. One of the things I remember from I think the first day, maybe when we got sworn in, was the clerk said, you have one job to do, and that's to vote. And I have taken that really seriously, because the only way you cannot vote is to leave the room. And I decided, and there were, as everybody has said, there have been some really hard votes, and you can really see both sides. But I decided that I was not going to what they call take a walk, that I was actually going to vote on every bill and just sort of be able to defend what why I voted the way I did, and just kind of go with it, because my one job is to vote.
Nice. Nice. And actually, the clerk has a little interview talking about the role of the clerk of the House. So that is also in our resource collection, folks, to take a look at. Logan, what do you have next for us?
This is a fun one, and I know that Senator Bellows did answer it already, but if you could, would you run for a higher office, or do you like the level of jurisdiction that you have right now?
I like the legislative part. I am not built for an executive. I get friends who say, "Oh, when are you going to run for governor?" It's like, I'm not. I like the collaborative nature of being a legislator. Yeah, it's not for me.
I have thought about it, and I do feel like I love what I do right now, and I wish I could do it. I wish we didn't have term limits, but we do, so I'll get another term after this one. And I'll tell you what goes into my thinking is, Maine is the only state in the country that has the option of publicly financing your campaign. So we have the Maine Clean Elections Program, which really, really helps level the playing field and minimize the amount of money and fundraising we need to do to run for office. And it's really a national model and something that we should all be really proud of. But that's not the case in federal elections. And Senator Bellows can tell you her experience in running for federal office. The demands for fundraising are extremely high and very different from legislative demands. And so it's not that it's a game, like I never would do that because of the fundraising, but it's a big dynamic. And then the other thing is, I sometimes, I think I need to go and visit with some senators and with our congressional delegation, because I don't have a good idea of what everyday work in Washington really looks like. And I would need to really educate myself a lot more about what that life looks like, not only the work involved in the actual Capitol and your committee work and your day-to-day life in Washington, but what it means to commute and what it means to represent, if you're in the Senate, the entire state. So it's something I'm curious about, and I could see it happening, but I have a lot of homework to do before I make that decision.
I'm enjoying hearing people be honest about how complex it all is. Senator Bellows or Representative Fay, do you have something to add?
So I said yes earlier, absolutely. It took me a long time to feel comfortable saying that out loud. Brief anecdote, I was in kindergarten and the teacher asked us, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I knew I wanted to be president or an artist. But they went around the room and all my friends said teacher. So I said teacher. Now, why do I remember this? Because I was like, I really want to be president or artist. So I think another lesson in being true to yourself, right? But I think it's really women are not encouraged to be ambitious. And you see gender-based stereotypes about women in leadership and who they are or not. And once women start to express ambition, that sometimes there's some negative backlash to that. But I I ran for U.S. Senate, so it's not a secret. That someday I want to be in higher office. And I think it's really important to say it out loud, and for women to be comfortable saying, whatever it is that you want to be, but saying that out loud, even if it feels, embarrassing, or you feel, that people might judge you differently for it.
We need to, women get asked to run for office, as I think it was Senator Bellows said, men walk around thinking, of course I could be president, and there's no, and I got asked.
But I didn't
true.
actually. When I
Yeah.
ran for Senate, no one was like, hey, Shenna Bellows, would you like to run against Susan Collins? What happened was, there were a bunch of different issues I was working on. There was a reproductive rights issue where she voted the wrong way, and someone in a meeting said, somebody should run against her. And we're all like, yeah, somebody should run against her. And then the marriage equality, I helped organize Republicans for Marriage Equality, and we wanted her desperately to endorse our statewide referendum. And she refused to do so. She didn't come out for marriage equality until I ran against her, after it had been legal for 2 years. And so, at that point, people are like, oh, somebody should really run against her. And we're all like, yeah. And then there was another bill on privacy that, as head of the ACLU, we were able to get it passed. We were one of the first states in the country to say law enforcement couldn't monitor your cell phone or internet communications without a warrant. And a reporter said to me, isn't this really a problem at the federal level? And it's like, yes, it is. And so no one was running for her. I kind of looked against her. I looked around, and there were like, nobody else was interested. So I was like, okay, I'm in. And so I did get asked to run for state senate. That did happen. But you have to, if you want something, you should go for it. Don't wait for someone to ask you to do it.
Yeah, and I when the seat I hold now was held by an independent senator from the district, and he surprised everybody when he decided to step down. And there was somebody already ready to run. And so when nobody asked me to run, I decided if I didn't do it now, someone else would lock it up for 8 years. And so I knew right away I'd have a primary. And some people would have said, oh, there's already a Democrat ready to run for that seat. I'll wait, I'll back off, I'll whatever. And I was like, no, it's now or never. I don't know what's going to happen in 8 years. I'm in. Just, I might lose, but now's the time. I'm doing it. So I agree that, don't wait. Don't think there's the right time or the perfect race or anything. When you feel when you want to do it, do it.
I think it's interesting that I think Representative Heppler is right that statistically, women generally are asked before they think of it. And I love hearing your stories about just making that choice. But it also makes me think about that we all have a role to play in asking ourselves and asking our community members to step up. So maybe if it's not for you, maybe you can be the one that asks, ask those leaders that you see to step up. Maybe they're just waiting for somebody to ask.
Well, research shows that women need to be asked 6 times before they say yes. So I'm going to do what I do in front of every group of women and say, okay, this is the first ask. Will you run for office, or when are you going to run for office? So you've all been asked once.
I'll ask you a second time. Run for office. Yeah. You should run for office. Yeah. Please run for office.
Somebody posted on the chat, don't wait for someone to open the door. You just go find a key and do it yourself. I like that.
Oh, so good. So good.
And that actually naturally kind of brought me to, if anybody else wanted to add, just when did you know that you were ready to just do this thing and enter into that race? Because I think that moment of not knowing if you're qualified enough and deciding to go for it anyway, I feel like almost everyone we've interviewed can kind of remember that moment. And I would love it if you were able to share that with our students.
Oh, I'd love to. It was around an issue that's actually near and dear to Senator Breen's heart, which was funding for Land for Maine's Future. And I was in a meeting with ultimately the person that was in the legislature that I beat when I ran the first time. And it was around releasing the funding for bond funding for Land for Maine's Future. And I think that was in 2000. It's either early 2016 or late 2015. And I had been dabbling around the idea of maybe running. But in this meeting, this representative completely disregarded everything that everyone in the room was saying, and that things that people in his community really wanted, which was for him to vote to release the bond funding so that one of the projects in our district could actually be completed. And I was looking around the room, and there were probably 10 or 15 people in the room, and I thought, somebody's got to run against this guy. He's not representing his district well at all. And I walked out of that meeting, and I kept thinking, who is going to run? Who is going to run? Because I was thinking it wasn't time for me to run yet. And then I realized that I had to stop looking around for somebody to run, and that it was going to have to be me. And then I just did it 110%, because if you're going to do something, you might as well do it the best you can. But it was, you know, there was some inspiration there, and and my mom was an elected official, but I had never run, and I wasn't ready. And, or I thought I wasn't ready, but apparently I was, because I beat a 3-term incumbent Republican in a Republican district. And it was just because I worked and listened.
Sophia Khalid, the city councilor in Lewiston, shared almost the same story of people saying, it's not your time, it's not your time, it's not your time. And she just decided it was her time, and apparently it is. So do other folks have something they want to share, that moment you knew?
I do not have the same moment that Representative Fay does. I got asked by a younger woman, Kate Elms, who grew up in my town and said she watched me, you know, on the select board. And she asked me, and I said, sure. And, you know, and once I decided to do it, then, you know, as Representative Fay said, you go all in. I had no idea what it was going to be like, and I just did all the things I was supposed to do, and ended up winning. We all worked really hard. I also beat an incumbent. In fact, in the description that she shared, it sounds like the person I beat, who was also an opponent of Land for Maine's Future. But it never occurred to me. I was happy being on the select board, which I also got asked to do, not having any idea what that was going to be like. But then it just did it, and it turns out I love it, and I love being a legislator.
There are also supports to help people. So, you know, I decided to run, but then I went and I took a course from Yale Campaign School for Women. And even before I decided to run for my first race, since I secretly knew, although I didn't dare say it yet, that I wanted to run for office someday, I did Emerge Maine about 4 years before my first race. So Emerge is a program that trains Democratic women to how to run for office or how to manage a campaign if you're more interested in being a campaign manager or staffer. So there are now, those resources are pretty new. They're just in the last, 15 years, I think it is, but they're available now and they're robust. And so you're not, once you make that decision, you're not necessarily alone. There are other, you know, like Senator Breen said earlier, there are people who will lift you up and who will believe in you and who will help you. You know, the first time I met Representative Fay was before she'd run for office when I was running, and she was a huge help. We didn't even know each other. And so you know, women do support women. That's another gender-based stereotype, is that this idea that women are more competitive with each other or don't want to see each other succeed, and that is utter garbage. you know, of course, sometimes we're going to be competitive with each other. Sometimes we're going to be in primaries against each other potentially, but or have been, you know, and some of us, Senator Breen is running against a woman this cycle. But in general, what I've seen in the legislature is that largely women are supportive of one another, and in campaigns, 100% true.
Mm. Nice. I want to pick up on that thread about like actually preparing to do it. And Senator Breen had mentioned early on that like part of her preparation was growing up in a family with a bunch of siblings and older brothers. One of the questions that had been submitted to us that I really want to respond to is, how long do you have to go to college to be a legislator? Because I want to firmly say you absolutely don't have to go to college.
Zero.
Right? And so I wonder if you'll share with us what you actually did feel like was good preparation. Like what prepared you, what trained you, what in your life has supported your skills that you now employ as either a candidate or a legislator?
I can say that the most important thing for me is talking to people and learning from people who've already done it. That's the best way that I learn. There's 1,000,001 books or webinars or you know, emerge training is very, very good. That didn't exist when I was first running for office. So to me, I have always, in all of my endeavors, I think, when I think back, and maybe that's a product of being the youngest of 6 kids also, is, you know, I see people who are ahead of me in life and I go, wait a minute, how did you get there? What did you do to get to where you are? What were the steps? What were the puzzle pieces that you put together to get there? What roadblocks did you run into? How did you get around them? What did you learn when you didn't succeed that you could advise me about? So to me, the best tool is curiosity and being willing to learn from people who've come before me. I have a political science and history degree. I have a master's in education. You know, there's nothing other than Schoolhouse Rock, which probably you two, all of you, are too young for, but you know, how a bill becomes a law and the 3 branches of government. I mean, you know, that's the essential knowledge you need to be a legislator, just to understand that there's an executive branch, a legislative branch, and a judicial branch, and they all work together to keep the state on the rails. There is no specific education that I have employed in my work. It's definitely been more learning from mentors and learning on the job and seeking out information and skills that I think will help me be better at my job. So there's nothing magic, nothing secret, no threshold that you have to cross. As Senator Bellows said, you know, you think you can do it, you can do it. There's no certification that says you're ready to run for office.
And
you're ready. You're ready.
Being willing to ask. I think that's an incredible skill. Do other folks something?
I was going to say, I just watch what Senator Breen does, and I do that.
You're funny.
My mother was an elected official, so I grew up going to planning board meetings and town council meetings, and you know, coloring under the table. One of my first memories is being at a planning board meeting, and my mom was actually running the meeting, and I was literally sitting under the table with crayons and a coloring book, kind of listening and taking in what what was being said. I had no idea what they were talking about, but it did sound important and interesting. And I think being curious, yeah, and being willing to want to learn and want to be better. Like I said about campaigning, being a legislator is the same thing. It's wanting to do it the best that you possibly can and taking advantage of the resources that are around you, which I don't think you need college to be able to learn. You know, I think college is a really important thing for some people, and I think for others it may not be the easiest way to learn. It took me 5 years to graduate from college because I got somewhat distracted, and that's not because I'm not smart enough. It's because I was curious and went off in a bunch of different directions, and that's okay. Yeah, just whatever inspires you to learn, just focus on that.
I'm going to add, I actually teach I teach history at UMaine Farmington, and I think the history part has helped me when I think back on it, to to seek out answers. I mean, I love when somebody calls and asks, well, what are the how can I check out the the history. I don't want to pay my excise tax for my car anymore. And so then I thought, okay, I'm going to look into this and see how this works. And so I'm using my research skills, and and also I think probably teaching is also helpful in terms of listening and drawing out other people's thoughts. But yeah, but so that's what's worked for me. But there are people in the legislature from all walks of life, and they each bring a talent. And so that's the talent, if that's what you want to call it, to my job. But people bring other talents from being a fisherman, or being an electrician, or being a contractor. So.
Representative Heppler is exactly right. So in the chat, people have been saying that they want to be a singer, an architect, guidance counselor, middle school teacher. I'm here to say on the Labor and Housing Committee, we have an architect on our committee. She's not in the legislature anymore, but there was a professional singer who was in the legislature and she continued until term limits ended her term. There are lots of teachers. Actually, Maine makes it so you can teach your classes and be in the legislature at the same time. You don't have to give up being a teacher to do it. And then just an anecdote, because I think this is so cool. Representative Ryan Fecteau ran for the House of Representatives when he was a senior in college. He was actually going to school out of state, but he decided he wanted to run for representative. And so he came on vacation and got his signatures to get on the ballot. And then when he came home from his senior year, he just knocked on 1 million doors. That's how you win in the legislature, is you knock on a lot of doors. I don't know how it's going to be this year, but and he won. And he was really great because he's just so smart and committed. And so his second term, 2 years out of college, he got appointed to chair the Labor, Commerce, and Research and Economic Development Committee. I was on that committee. He was one of my chairs. Did a great job, super, hard worker, really super smart, really cared. And so the next year when he ran again for his third term, he ran for what's called the whip, the assistant majority leader of the House. And now he's running for speaker. So my point is, you can be an architect or be a singer or be a guidance counselor and then go into office someday and bring that expertise. We need teachers on the education committee to help shape what happens in our schools. Having an architect on the housing committee is really helpful. Or you can, your senior year, if you decide to go to college, your senior year in college, be like, I'm doing it. And I'm pretty sure nobody asked a senior who was going to school out of state if he wanted to be the nominee for, the House of Representatives for that district. He just decided he wanted to do it.
And also, just slightly different perspective, I was a stay-at-home mom for 15 years, and so I had a kid with special needs that required a lot of my attention. And so I was, I had left the workforce and was a stay-at-home mom when I was on the town council for 6 years. So there's a million identities, you know, that people bring into any of this work, and they all matter.
Lovely. Logan, what have you got for us from the chat box?
Yeah, absolutely. First, I just want to thank everyone again for sharing sort of how you got into the political world. The community organizer session that we had really was the same thing, where it showed that everybody comes at it from a different angle. And the fact that you can come into politics from anywhere actually adds to your ability to do that work. But just to pivot, we've gotten a couple of questions about this, and it's the thing on everyone's minds. How has COVID-19 impacted your role as a legislator and the way that you interact with your community?
So I just touched on this. My first run for state senate, the way that I won is I knocked on just over 10,000 doors. So every weekend, every night after work, I was working full time. I would go out and I would knock on people's doors and I would say, "Hi, I'm Shenna Bellows. I'm running for state senate. What issue matters to you?" I would listen, and then I would say, "Can I count on your vote?" The second time that when I ran for re-election, I was working full-time still, and I was a senator. So knocking on doors was a little bit more challenging, but I knocked on over 8,000 doors. So this time we have a pandemic. I think if I'm knocking on doors, people are going to be like, "What are you doing on my property?" So the question becomes, like, how do I effectively ask people to vote for me again? How do I hear what's important to them, which is such a critical conversation in re-election campaigns? So we're having to campaign a little bit differently, doing more stuff online, and just thinking through what that's going to look like. It's still not clear to me. And then in terms of the legislature, we got done on March 17th. Now, the Labor and Housing Committee just had a hearing at the legislature on unemployment. But for that hearing, we all wore masks. I have asthma, but I wore that mask for 4.5 hours because on our committee, we had 2 people who had been at Open the Government protests on one side of the ideological spectrum. And then we had someone who's in chemotherapy and someone else whose wife is fighting lung cancer as we speak, and someone else with a heart condition. And so we had to do social distancing in the committee room. We had to do some things electronically. We all had to wear masks. So it was very different to be at the legislature in the COVID-19 pandemic. But we have to be creative and do things to keep each other safe.
I spend all day on the phone or emails, and it's, I get more phone calls than I have ever gotten before, more emails, and trying to, negotiate answers, find answers for people, check back with them. At one point, I asked 2 people who have been in the legislature before me, I said, "Is it always like this?" And they just laughed. Because it's not always. This has been a particularly busy time. I really enjoy it. It is busy. The other thing we do, Saginaw County is a small county, and so we're able. The legislative delegation meets weekly on a phone call. In fact, that's later today, and and we meet with the county sheriff is also on the call, and the emergency management person. So we're able to kind of keep in touch that way. And I support all sorts of local community suppers, and even if it's like you show up and you pick up your food and you go home, and I try to do a lot of that advertising, that kind of community events on Facebook and other social media. And I have no idea what we're going to do about campaigning.
I think it's important to remind everybody and remember that we are a part-time legislature, even in normal circumstances. We meet we have a 2-year cycle, and we meet from January to June the first year. And then the second year, we go from January to April. So we did adjourn a month early because of the pandemic, but we would not be in session now anyway. We would all be in full tilt campaign mode. And Senator Bellows made mention of the wellness calls that she and her volunteer team are doing. And that is not really a, call and ask for a vote, but it's a call and check in with folks and remind folks that who you are, what you do, how you can be helpful. And I've been doing quite a lot of that myself, and it's amazing how much it matters to people, where they say, oh, well, and it's interesting. What I hear a lot is we're okay, but we really worry about other people. But people are very, very grateful that we are reaching out and being proactive to make sure they've got food, medications, heating, fuel oil, transportation if they need it, sort of basic things. And I'm sure I'm not alone. I field questions from local businesses about, reopening and how that's going to go. And we're providing a lot of channels of communication between the administration that's sort of largely in charge of managing things right now and our members of our community. So we are going to go back. My committee, Appropriations, is actually going to convene. We're one of the committees that meets all year round in normal times because we sort of just track the finances of the state all year long. So we're going to set up a Appropriations Committee hearing, and we're going to rely heavily on Senator Bellows' committee because they're the only ones who have met so far with the context of the pandemic. So they were the groundbreakers on the technology and on the social distancing in the building, and making sure the public had access to the hearing and following all those important good government rules. And so we're going to largely rely on what the Labor Committee did, learn from that, continue to improve it, and continue to work with our colleagues to keep our work going. And to make it accessible to the public and transparent and safe to everybody who participates. So we're kind of in a new territory and learning and being deliberate with every single step.
Nice, thank you. Well, I am keeping an eye on the time here, and I think it is about time for us to go around and make sort of final comments. I can't believe it, but here we are. So I want to give you all an opportunity to just sort of share your last words of wisdom with our participants. We've got a great group there. So maybe.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, I'll say that all of you on this call should feel free to reach out to any of us with any questions when you start, your political experience, whether it's, in high school or college or in the town or the state, because you guys are going to, what the world you create is going to be awesome. And I can't wait to be part of that. So if I can help in any way, please let me know.
Thank you, Representative Heppler.
And I'll echo that. This has been such a pleasure, and I'm so glad that we had the opportunity to be together and to answer these questions. And absolutely, by all means, reach out to us. And when this is over and when we're back in session, and hopefully after all of us are reelected, come to the Statehouse and visit. And I'd be happy. I've had a number of women come and just kind of hang out with me for the day, and I'm happy to do that. So please stay in touch and keep us up to date on what it is that you're doing and what your dreams are.
Yeah, I will echo that as well. One of the best days in the Statehouse is when we have students or other people with us, and we're showing them how it all works. And it's endlessly fascinating to me, so I love to share it. And I want to thank you, Dusty, and everybody from the Women's Lobby, and especially the people who signed on today. As you can tell, I love my work, and I feel really, really fortunate to do it, and I love to talk about it. And I also love to mentor people and help in whatever way I can to help you in whatever you're working on. And if you're working on a career in public service, that's great. And I have lots of resources to offer, but you know, whatever you're working on, whatever your path is going to bring, people like all of us really care about our communities and always want to be helpful and accessible and supportive to whatever you're working on to make your world better. So thank you for your time today. Thank you for inviting me. And thank you for your interest in what we do. It means a lot.
Thank you.
I'll say that you're already doing the right thing by participating with what a wonderful organization, Maine Women's Lobby and Maine Women's Education Fund, do some really phenomenal work at the Statehouse. And I think staying connected and finding ways to stay connected is huge. If you have an idea, there was a question earlier about pollution that we didn't get to, but if you have an idea on any piece of legislation, reach out to your legislator or reach out to us and say, I have this idea for something that should be law. And you might be able to work with us to see that happen. And then I'll just end where I started. I just think it's so important. We've talked about this for the entire time. It doesn't matter who you are or where you come from. You can do whatever it is that you want to do. You are unique and amazing just the way you are. And I just think telling ourselves that over and over again, but also seeing it as truth is really important. So thank you. This is the best part of my day so far.
Thank you so much, Senator Bellows. And Senator Breen and Representative Fay and Representative Heppler. I enjoyed this enormously, and I hope our participants did too. And something about the chat is making me think, since they want Girls' Day to go on forever, I kind of do too. Enjoyed it. I'm going to switch over quickly to some much less exciting and also, though, important logistics and remind you about what we have going on here at the Girls' Day website. So you will find when you head over here a whole bunch of stuff, including welcomes from all of these lovely notables, including the folks that I accidentally forgot to play at the beginning of this session today. Ooh, don't tell anyone. But do come over here and hear stories from Representative Pingree, from Senator Susan Collins, from the Speaker of the House, and Governor Mills. And then head on down, you'll see the little sessions on how a bill becomes a law. You'll get to hear from a bunch of awesome career lobbyists. You'll get to hear from our committee chairs. You'll get to hear from the virtual behind the scenes with the House Chamber, more about money and politics. So a bunch of things that we touched on today are all waiting there for you in that folder. And I suspect that this summer we will probably do more sessions following up on some of the things we weren't able to get to for this, which are a lot of interest in like area specific. People wanted to know about like environment and climate change and, you know, sexual and domestic violence. And so I think we'll be doing a lot more of this. I also want to remind folks that none of this would be possible without our sponsors. They really help make this, like, we can't pay for a website if we don't have sponsorship. And so we had some amazing sponsors that really are invested in making this happen. And we want to be able to report back to them that it was worth that investment. So go ahead and click on this link in the chat box. It'll take you 3 minutes to let us know what you thought of this session. And then next week, you'll hear more from Logan and I about kind of next steps, staying in touch, and then an overall just survey about what you liked about this, what you'd like to see more of, how we can improve it for the future. I know surveys are nobody's favorite, And yet they're the best way we have to hear from you about whether this made a difference and how we can make sure we're doing better. I think, Logan, have I forgotten any last details?
I think that that's it. I just personally want to say how much fun these live Zoom sessions have been. I mean, having the chat going, I'm sure all of our incredible legislators can see that in the chat. I mean, just it's what a fantastic group to be able to work with. I've always come away feeling so cool and supported, and we just wanted to thank, I mean, everyone who came, not only to be interviewed, but also to just participate. So yeah, thank you so much. But I do think that we covered all of our bases in terms of ending the session. Third time's really the charm on that.
Well, thank you, Logan. Thank you to our panelists, and thank you so much to our participants. Love you all.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you.